Right. My question is, how many times is Steven Avery going to be permitted to change his story of the events on October 31st and thereafter? Um, One thing I want to talk about right now, which is sort of older news, but most of the stuff that I've seen regarding this information is always um, upheld and looked at as like this is proof, that Avery is innocent. But I don't see it that way. I see it at the exact opposite. Okay, and one thing that I want to talk about is Blaine Dassey's affidavit. Um, well, before I talk about that, I want to talk about the November 3rd trip to Menards, which in all of Steven's police interviews, the only two people that he mentions going was him and Chucky. And Chucky doesn't mention Blaine going when in his interview when he's like in the car and they're driving him to take DNA samples or whatever. The video is almost unlistenable because Chuck spends most of the time on his telephone. But anyway, he never mentions. It's always Steve and Chucky. And not only does Steve and Chucky not mention Blaine going with them to Menards, Blaine says that he doesn't go in his November 6th police statement, which was only 3 days after the trip to Menards happened. Blaine says he didn't go. He says that Steven and Chuck, one of them asked Blaine if he wanted to go, and Blaine declined, said he had something else to do, which is funny to me because Steven says that Bobby says the same thing when he asks. Steven says Bobby says that he has something else to do, so he doesn't go. But either way, Blaine says he doesn't go to Menards on November 6th, and then when they come back out on November 11th to do a touch-up with Blaine, he also says that he doesn't go. So I'm assuming that Steven can just say, well, okay, I remember 10 or 11 years ago, Blaine did go. So whatever Steven says is true. So Blaine did go. So Blaine was lying and had no reason to lie about going on a trip to Menards, but Blaine was lying because Steven said that he went. Why does Steven say that Blaine went? Because according to Steven, that would have left Bobby at home alone and would have gave him, run of the mill. He could have done everything undetected. Nobody would have been there to witness anything. They wouldn't have witnessed Bobby breaking in Steven's house and stealing Steven's blood from his sink. But anyway, and I want to talk about in Blaine Dassey's affidavit. He talks about the white plastic bag that he saw Steven put in his burn barrel. And he says in his first statement, Blaine says that he saw smoke coming from the burn barrel, but in his affidavit he still says that he sees Steven putting the white plastic bag into the burn barrel, but he doesn't see a fire or anything from the burn barrel. Now this may not sound very important, but what happened to the plastic white bag that Steven put in the burn barrel? Because Steven says that he never burned anything on the whole week, after Teresa was there, from October 31st, from November 4th, he never burned anything in his burn barrel. So I guess that leaves either Steven decided he didn't want to throw the bag away, or Bobby or whoever burnt Teresa's belongings either took the bag out when they planted the evidence, or they actually burnt her belongings inside Steven's burn barrel. So, I mean, it may not seem like anything, but what happened to the bag? Because he never burned anything. The bag should have still been there. Did somebody take it, or was Blaine just full of shit? Who knows? I don't know why he would lie about seeing him put a white plastic bag in his burn barrel and on November 6th, and then his affidavit he still says that he saw Steven put the plastic bag in the burn barrel. Even though Joshua Redant also says that he's seen smoke coming from, said it looked like it was coming from Steven Avery's property, somewhere on Steven Avery's property on that day. So I guess both of them are lying. Everybody's lying except Steven. Also, Steven pretty much implies in his affidavit that Bobby, after Chuck and Steven and Blaine went to Menards, that Bobby got in his Blazer and drove it to Steven's house because Steven says he saw taillights, you know, as they were leaving. But on November 6th, Steven tells the police that they asked him where the taillights were, and he said it looked like they were behind me. And the cops say, "What's behind there? Is there a road?" And Steven says, "No, there's a hill, but you can drive on it." In Steven's affidavit, he says that the taillights were in front of him. So which one is it? Were the taillights behind Steven's, or were they in front of Steven's? That's just, you know, there's just so much. I mean, how many times is he going to be allowed to switch his statement? I mean, it's already on, just from her, the time she arrived at his property, that changed. It changed from, he said, once he says he goes outside and pays her by the van, and she gets in her RAV4 and whatever, and then it goes to that, he comes out and she's walking toward his trailer and she waves at him and then goes back and gets in her vehicle, and he pays her while she's inside her vehicle. I mean, there's a lot of stuff, you know, that doesn't make any sense. I want to talk about the timeline, the different timelines that Steven gives to for Teresa arriving to his property. At first, it's between 2 and 2:30, and he's very insistent on that too. There's no other option. She was there between 2 and 2:30. At one point he even tells the police that it could have been 5 after, 10 after, or quarter after. Okay, so that's the story that he stuck to for a long time. Then it goes, she arrived at 2:31. Okay, and she was there, and she left, and at 2:35 he says he called her to see if she could come back and take a picture of the front end loader. Okay, so it goes from 2:31, now she arrives at 2:35, and the 2:35 call is, he says he calls the number and then hangs up immediately because he sees she's already out there. So, you know, it goes from in between 2 and 2:30 to 2:31 to 2:35. So, you know, how can you not question this? I mean, you can't keep changing your story and remain credible in your statements. Also, talk about the headlights that Chuck sees as him and Brandon are going up north. And he says he calls Steven and says, you know, wants Steven to go check out around his place because he's seen headlights by his place. So who does Steven say he's with at the time Chuck calls? Bobby. You know, so Bobby's with Steven on Friday. So who, if there's always been, my understanding is that, but Steven seeing tail lights and Chucky seeing headlights, you know, it's like they're treating that as it's really important, you know, that this happened and they saw it. And now everything's going, you know, it seems like Bobby is the main suspect in this whole thing. But here it is on Friday, the suspicious activity going on, and Bobby's with Steven. You know, so who's doing all this? And it may not even have been anything. But it's always been a big deal to Steven that he saw taillights on Thursday, and then Chucky saw headlights on Friday. But regardless of any of this, I mean, is it just me, or does anybody else feel that Kathleen Zellner is rewriting the whole thing? I mean, it's almost like this is her affidavit, not Steven's, because stuff that she has tweeted and all that about, specifically the blood in his sink, the same thing that she tweeted about the cops. It wouldn't have been the cops because the cops wouldn't have known if it was Teresa's blood or Steven's blood, which is, you know, I don't get that at all. But anyway, Steven says that exactly in his, that's the exact verbatim what he says in his affidavit. So who wrote it? I mean, whose words are these? Are they Steven's or are they Kathleen Zellner's? And anyway, you can take it for what it is. But I mean, to me it's obvious. There's no questioning it. Or you can question it, but to me there's no other way. You know, she's rewriting the whole thing to suit her narrative that it was Bobby Dassey, because I don't think she has anything else to go on. That's because if Bobby hadn't have said that if he hadn't saw Teresa that day, she would have nothing. There's nothing else to go on. And then I guess she's got the computer with the porn and every, you know, the disturbing images and all that. But I was going to, Blaine also says that when nobody's at his residence, that it's always locked. Okay, so that means that he never, Steven says this too, I don't know how Steven would know that Barb's house is always locked when nobody's there, but Steven says this too. And but if you remember, I think it was on November 5th when Bobby goes to get his, I think it's his dog, his puppy. They have the Avery yard blocked off. Police have it blocked off, and Bobby asked the police if one of them would go, you know, retrieve his dog for him, and they did. And in the statement, Bobby informs the police that the doors would be unlocked. So they're not always locked if nobody's there. So that, you know, there's one time, that's one time that the doors were left unlocked when nobody was home. So anyway, I'm going to leave it at that, and I will maybe make another video sometime, I don't know, but have a good day.